a lot of opinions from multiple sources that are not necessarily in line with a faith-based perspective.
As friends, we often chat about many current topics and relationship issues.
Lend your ear and peep into our private conversation.
Welcome to Realistic Conversations,
A platonic perspective with Kay and Ryan.
Hey, Kay, what's going on?
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, all the above.
Yep, it was a wonderful holiday.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. I was down in Charlotte, so it was kind of freezing in the beginning, but as the days progressed, the weather got better, and I was able to hit some mountain biking trails.
Oh, that is nice. That's really good. I know you love to go out and get your hike on. As you know, I was there too, but I had to come home early, and it wasn't as warm when I got home, but all is well, all is well. It was a great holiday. So what's going on?
Hey, nothing much. Now I call you to chop it up. I would say my wife has been telling me about these conversations on social media. Gender roles.
What about them?
She showed me one video when this dude was like, women of today are too masculine.
Was that literally the word he used, masculine?
Masculine,
or was it
as in not as in anatomy, but as in the roles that they want to play.
That women want to play?
Yes. And their expectations of men. And it was kind of disturbing.
Well, I know I've seen a lot of things out there about the alpha male, alpha female perspective, and women being too independent. Was that similar to the conversation that you saw, or what were they talking about?
I mean, they weren't saying they were too independent. Well, yeah, they're too independent. Yeah.
So what is it that they're asking for? Because remember, you and I talked a little bit a couple weeks ago, and my contention was I think that men have ideas in their heads about what a wife should do and particular roles she should perform without having that communication or desire to have that in a wife or a partner until they get married.
I think the same thing happens with women. Right. So unfortunately, my wife and I didn't have that discussion. But what came up, well, it wasn't necessarily the roles. Well, it was the roles, right? But we didn't have that discussion. But as things pop up, we would have a discussion. Like, for example, I love to cook.
Okay.
She cooks as well, but then when I went to school, guess what? That changed.
Mm-hmm.
She had to do most of the cooking.
Okay.
And then when she was working from home, guess what? I was in school, she was working at home, and much cooking wasn't getting done.
Right.
Yeah. So we just do what we can do to maintain the household. So it's not necessarily like she has to do it, or is expected that she do it, or is expected that I do it. But what the expectations are is if we make an agreement, we expect each other to uphold our part of the agreement.
So you guys adjusted based on what was going on in your life. But would you say, like a lot of my male friends, when you got married, you might have had an expectation that she was going to do most of the cooking?
No.
Okay.
Nah, it wasn't, because actually we discussed that she doesn't like cooking. She cooks because she have to.
All right.
Right. And from my experience, if a person don't like to cook, well, that's my thought process. If a person don't like to cook, the food ain't gonna taste that good.
Okay.
So I was like, you know what? I have no problem cooking because I like cooking. But
All right.
I think what the guys are talking about is much more than the roles in the household. Is more of an attitude. Yeah, it's more of an attitude situation versus who do what in a relationship.
Oh, okay. So really wasn't gender roles, but it's how a woman is showing up as her gender.
Yes.
So it's more masculine versus feminine.
Yes.
Okay.
So some people might say masculine, and other people might say independent.
Or would you also agree that a lot of people also use the term alpha female?
Yeah, people use the term alpha female.
Or do you think their point was different to that description?
Well, they didn't use the term alpha female, but I've heard people say, she's an alpha female, he's an alpha male.
Yeah.
And that me and my wife fits those descriptions.
So what was the contention in the video? What were they asking for?
Well, not
from
really asking
women?
what they were saying, that women want to take the role of a man. They act like they don't need a man, but they
Mm.
want a man to show up when they need a man to show up.
So what's an example of a woman acting like she doesn't need a man? Because I do
I've
hear
never,
that, but I never understand what it really means to some certain people.
you know what? Have I ever dated a woman who acted like a man? I can't really say.
Because I think what you would see, you wouldn't really define as acting as a man. That's why you wouldn't say that. Because I think what you see as a woman just being independent, some people feel like that's a woman taking a man's place and omitting the need for a man.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm secure in my manhood. So if a woman is independent, that does not bother me.
That's
Because what she do, how she do it, when she do it, where she do it, does not dictate who I am as a man. So for example, I told my wife before, it takes a confident man to be with a confident woman. Sometimes I think because of some men's insecurities that some of us use that as a cop out.
If I could give you a high five, I would.
But I would say there's a but too. Sometimes some women are out there and they're just hardcore. You know what? I've never dated a woman who was super independent, and there's a reason why. When we have conversations and when I hear certain words like I don't need a man or man this, man that, I always think to myself, that's a hurt woman.
Okay.
And that's a woman I don't want to be with.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that the woman who's stating that she doesn't need a man is probably the type of woman the guys were talking about in the podcast you were watching. But I do think that there are differences into how we show up as independent women, because of course, when you've been on your own for a long time, there are certain things that as a woman, you're just naturally used to doing. So, for example, we have to go food shopping all the time. We're used to packing up the car, taking the food out of the car, unpacking the groceries. So one time I was with a friend and I was unloading and reloading my car. And he came over, he said, "Let me help you with that." Immediately I was like, "Oh, I got it," because I'm so used to doing it. And he pretty much reminded me that I was being offered help. So when you get offered help, to take the help. And it triggered in my mind, yes, you're absolutely right. I need to go ahead and let you be you and be the man. And that was fine for me. There was no need for me to push further to say, oh, no, I'm capable. I don't need a man to help me. Of course, I want a man to help me. Like, absolutely, yes. And I was also listening to a podcast where this one woman went on a date and the guy was hesitant and looked at the bill and looked at her and didn't know what to do. So she looked at him and she said, "Yeah, you can go ahead and take that." And he was relieved because he said that earlier he was on a date with a woman. And when he went to take the bill, she completely lost it. She reprimanded him for not respecting her as an independent woman and that she could pay her half of the bill. So he was clueless as to, okay, I don't know how to navigate in these dating streets. What am I supposed to do? Do you want me to show up and be chivalrous, or don't you want me to show up? So it's sad that it's so confusing. It really shouldn't be. But I think people have to have the conversations.
But it's difficult to have that conversation if it's a first date, right? So
Is it?
yeah.
why don't I think that you'd have that conversation before you go on the date?
Well, not
Hey,
necessarily
I'm the type
because
of woman who likes to be treated out by whoever is interested in me. You know, what's your perception? Do you believe in going Dutch? That's just like that. You could have that conversation and make it light before you go
I
out.
the way how you say it sounds good, but from my perspective, if I'm going out on the first date and I ask the lady, well, how do you like before we even get out? Well, how do you like? Do you go Dutch? Do you do this? Do you do that? To me, that's making me seem like I can't afford to take her out,
Okay. So
right? So,
maybe it's you just ask her opinion about what does she feel is appropriate in a dating situation.
man, that's too much work. That
So you rather just go ahead and go for what you believe is paying for it and showing up and being chivalrous.
yeah, because
Okay.
if I'm interested in a woman, then to me, for me to be asking, well, I guess for some people in that instance, it's a big deal. But if I'm inviting you out, then I got the bill. I don't want to be embarrassed in the restaurant talking about what I thought we was going to do half because I was afraid to ask or I didn't ask. For me, I'm kind of traditional, so if I ask you out, I'm paying.
So maybe that's how you have the conversation, or a guy would have the conversation. Hey, are you the traditional kind of woman or not? Right? Because again, in this example that the guy gave, the lady really got upset with him for reaching for the bill to pay for it.
Yeah, I guess she was single.
She probably still is. She probably still is, which is sad, which is sad. So, what about in areas where you are thinking that you're filling a traditional role and then you both don't have agreement on what traditional is?
Certain conversations you would have as a couple, right? And that's where a courtship comes in. So as you're getting to know the person and situations come up, or now we have social media, so you might discuss topics on social media. It's very important to pay attention to what the person says. Because if you and that individual don't agree on the topic, guess what? That's how she personally feels, and you take it for face value. Don't be like, oh, that was just a disagreement. I don't really feel like that. Nah, I always take certain conversations as face value and I move accordingly. So, like even with my married friends, right? Sometimes we would say that, our wives want us to be men when it's convenient for them.
Like taking out the garbage.
Well, no, it's not even taking out the garbage, right? So, for example, in certain decision making, they want to make the decision. But when it
Mm.
don't work, they blame the guy because they never took his opinion into account.
So how do you do that? Is it a discussion of, okay, we have a situation, you both present what you think should be the solution, and then you decide which one is the better solution? How does that work when you're saying that instead of your decision being the final say,
Well,
the
unfortunately, I know I'm going to be hated for saying this, but a lot of times our wives can behave like spoiled children.
well, we say that about you guys too.
That's my whole point, right? Unfortunately, sometimes. So sometimes when I don't want to say can't get their way, but okay. Sometimes if you don't agree on the topic, they take it personal.
So then you just give in.
Some people give in, some people don't, right? The people who give in, then let's say you give in, then the wife, she goes ahead, does what she want to do, and then the situation don't work. Guess who gets the blame? Guess who gets the blame for not being man enough and speaking up?
So you're supposed to stop us from making the wrong call.
Mm, it's not that simple.
No, that's why you're getting the blame, is because what the expectation is that you should step up and say, no, don't do that, so that the right call is made.
But some dudes, when they step up, guess what happens?
They get blamed.
They get opposition. And then it
Mm-hmm.
goes to a battle like, oh, you this and you that and you this. And sometimes, a lot of times, women make decisions. From my experience, a lot of decisions is made from an emotional standpoint. Not all, but a lot.
Okay.
right? And sometimes some dudes see it rationally and be like, I don't think that's gonna work. And hold on. And when we say that, it is like everything deflates, like right? We're just saying that situation might not work. Then you get the pouting, the arguing. Like we discussed before in the conflict resolution, you're addressing something totally different in the conflict, right? And then sometimes you get the word throwing and you get the words always or never, right? So some dudes, like my motto is, I don't want to be right. I want to be happy. So sometimes you choose your battles and you choose it wisely.
Well, would you say that there are certain things that require more thought and time on making a decision? So, although as women, sometimes we might respond emotionally, I do think that as women, we're also very logical. So, if it's a major decision, it's okay, let's have the conversation today. Let's not make a decision today. Let's revisit this in 1 or 2 days. And then in 1 or 2 days, when more processing, more logic has occurred, then in 2 days, maybe there is a different decision. I think the severity of that decision is important, right? You go out and get the car today. It's, hey, I want another car today. Oh, you might say, well, we don't really need another car. We're saving for this, we're saving for that. I'm sick of my car. I want another car. That's the emotional side. But then 2 days later, I might say, you know what? My husband is right. We have a budget. We're looking at doing X, Y, and Z. All right, I'm going to wait.
The way how you just said it, you made it sound simple, but it's not always that simple.
It's easy for me to say that because that's just one side of the conversation, which is my side, right?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Sometimes it's not that simple. Sometimes they want it and they want it now. And when you say it's not a good idea, then that's where the pouting and the tantrum happens, right? Like sometimes my wife would say, well, you got to understand, past experiences and what guys do. Because listen, unfortunately, a lot of our spouses have had bad experiences with men, with previous men.
Making bad decisions.
Yes, classic. When females are younger, I've heard like they try to do the traditional thing, and then the guys make a lot of selfish decisions, and because they have been burnt, they take control of what they need to do. So now you've been single for X amount of years, you have that mindset, I gotta do what I gotta do. And here you meet a guy who's saying, well, you don't have to do it that way. There's another way, an easier way. So now it's difficult to change. And a lot of times the trust is not there yet.
I was just going to say that. That's really not about whether or not there's a need to fill a role as in terms of gender. It's, hey, I don't know you to come through yet. I have to be able to trust your experience, your knowledge to say that, okay, this is the right call.
And here's the thing too. Like one of my friends always say, I'm a human being. I will make mistakes. It does not make me a bad husband. And a lot of times, we could think that something is going to work and it may not work. It doesn't mean you're a bad husband. It doesn't mean you're a bad man. It just meant that you made a mistake. And then sometimes that is prolonged and used against you for the next few years. Can't get over it, right? And then sometimes when your wives make a mistake, you say, you know what, I'm working on it. Right? And we as husbands, we're supposed to accept, well, I'm working on it. But if you make a mistake.
So you're saying there seems to be more grace that we give ourselves versus than we give our spouses.
Yeah. So I don't know if a spouse makes a mistake, if that's a trigger or a flashback to a past experience. And that's when all hell breaks loose.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So
because sometimes.
Is that aligned to the conversation about women being more masculine, or is that more aligned to the fact that we let our past baggage sometimes impede how we show up in our relationships.
Well, I mean, listen, that guy who said women were more masculine, he probably have his own reasons why he said it. But like I said, I've never dated a masculine woman who wants to take on my role. Once I have a conversation with a woman, I see that's the direction she's going. I'm like, peace. I run for the hills because that's not going to go good for me.
So I think as women, sometimes we get a bad rap because have always been a strong, independent, strong-willed child, and I'm a strong-willed adult, right? And so there are some men, and you mentioned men with insecurities. That could be it, but there are some men who believe that if you stick to your decision about certain things, then you're not being a submissive woman, that you're being masculine. For example, there was this one instance I had in a conversation with a guy I was seeing, and he asked me if I'm going out to lunch, if we're married, and I'm going out to lunch with my coworkers outside of the building, will I call him to let him know? And I said, I might,
Why would you have to
but
call?
so that he's aware that I'm outside of the building just in case something happens. He knows where his wife is. So I said, yeah, I don't have an issue with that. I might do that, but I don't think there should be an expectation that every time there's a outing with my team and we're going out to lunch that I'm going to text you and check in to say, hey, FYI, I'm out of the office today, right?
No, you're doing that.
So I definitely am not opposed to doing it. But again, I don't want there to be an expectation that I have to do it. The expectation should be just, in my opinion, hey, sometimes I take the team out to lunch. Sometimes the team takes me out to lunch. Sometimes we leave the building. His response was that I'm not ready to be married. I'm too independent and I want to be single while I'm married.
Who's this? Who this guy? He's insecure.
Well, my point is that the label he's giving, because I'm taking a decision, making a call that is good for me, is that I'm too independent. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with your insecurities and the need to be in control of every situation with your spouse. That doesn't make any sense, right? So the label is again, oh, you're too independent, you're too this, you're too that. No, I'm capable of making decisions that are adult decisions, in my opinion.
Well, my wife works from home. Would I expect her to tell me, yo, I walked to Walgreens. I went to a restaurant to get lunch.
In that example, it wasn't that there was a need for a call in all the time, right? It's, hey, there could be a external risk. So you might want to do the check-in thing. And again, my contention was that shouldn't have to be a requirement, right? So a lot of times, as I was suggesting, is that it's insecurities that are showing up in people on both sides on why we have the positions that we have sometimes.
Yeah, because if you don't call me and say you're going out to lunch with your coworkers, I'm not thinking you're independent. I'm just thinking you were busy and you forgot.
Did I forget, or do I have to always call?
No, I'm just saying. For me, if my wife was to go out to lunch with her coworkers, if she was working outside the home, and she doesn't tell me, I'm not thinking, oh, you're too independent, you're not ready for marriage. I'm like, all right, it could be a spur of the moment.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not necessarily about being independent, not ready for marriage. I don't think he's ready for marriage. He's looking for a child. That's what I say. And I say that too, vice versa, right? Sometimes women have to watch their tone. You're not married to a child, you're married to a grown man, right? You can't look at your husband and when you're angry, you want to talk at him, you talk to him. And I said this before, right? Out there in society, I am not human enough. At work, I'm not qualified enough. And to come home and not be man enough, it's not a good feeling for a black man. So sometimes it's good to watch your tone. And most men who are secure with themselves and loving husbands, we don't like the belittling, right? We don't like the tone where because we make a mistake, now all of a sudden you're gonna talk down to us.
And unfortunately, I don't think there's always an awareness, because I've definitely been guilty of it. I don't think there's always an awareness that the tone is off. But I have a close friend that when that would happen and we're having a heated conversation, he would say, "Hey, your volume went up." And that's all he would say. He wouldn't get offended or yell or be, have an issue. And once he's checked me, immediately I would come back down because I'm not aware, right? Because of the whole being used to being very passionate and heated in conversation with family. It's cultural, but it's not cultural for everybody. So you can't just dismiss it to say, oh, it's cultural, because it's not okay for everyone. So he would just say, hey, your tone went, your inflection's kind of high, Kay. And then I would say, oh, I didn't even realize. And then I would bring it back down, right? To just manage the conversation and the temperature of the conversation. But for me, that was a good example of a very self-assured man with no insecurities, who was willing to look at the situation as just for what it is versus a character flaw. And I think a lot of these guys with these videos that you're watching, and maybe some of the experience of some of the women who are very toxic, it's all wrapped up into their character versus, hey, their experience is making them show up this way and it's not okay. Just like in your example, you said, there are things of the past of people that they may not have been able to trust. And now it's showing up with them not necessarily being open to a suggestion that you might have.
And one thing about relationships, there is a place of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to show some type of vulnerabilities at some point in time. And when I say you're going to have to show it, because when we behave human, then there's a trust that grows with that, right? So let me say this. If I'm a man who is always angry and don't trust my wife, and I want to say nag, but I'm always questioning everything, or if someone else makes me mad and I'm fly off the handle and never act like I'm a human being in the fact of being compassionate, understanding, or show that I have, how you say I'm in my feelings, that could be detrimental to the relationship as well. Because but for some of us as men, I know this was one of my issues. I didn't want to appear to be weak in front of a woman, right?
So I'm hearing a couple of things. I think I heard that there are times where you might shut down.
Yes.
Okay. And then there are times where if you're emotional, you're not willing to show those emotions.
Yes.
Okay.
Because of the fear of not being man enough to show weakness as a man.
But that's ironic you said that, because just in the example that you were giving of your wife and other women not trusting, that's also you not trusting.
Yes.
So that's you not being able to trust that if I am vulnerable, if I show my emotions, if I not shut down, that she's going to handle me accordingly and she's going to be compassionate. So all of it is an issue of trust, was what I'm hearing.
And mine is not from past relationships, it's from growing up as a young boy. Boys don't cry. Boys don't show weakness. Real men don't cry. Real men don't show weakness. So you have that where you don't show weakness, you just shut down. You don't communicate, you shut down. And you keep your feelings to yourself because you don't want to look weak.
But you mentioned growth also in your comment earlier. And I do know that over time, once you are in relationship with someone, you learn how to trust. You do learn how to be vulnerable. It just takes time. And in the beginning, it could be scary, but I think once you're in marriage, that's just the work you have to do, because hopefully the goal is you're not going anywhere else. So you just have to go ahead and dive into those emotions, recognize that, okay, I might, be holding back a little bit in these areas, and have those conversations. So
Yeah, and also for wives, when your man is opening up, don't look at him like he's soft or weak, right? Because if we can't be ourselves at home, where else can we be ourselves?
mm-hmm.
If we can't tell you guys how we feel about a situation, then who else can we tell?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Some we as men, we were bonding with other men, and we would, oh no, this and this and that and this, but the things that we would like to tell our wives, we can't tell them, so we're gonna vent to our boys, right? And it doesn't always make it right, because sometimes we get bad advice from our friends. Sometimes we get good advice, sometimes we get bad advice. But sometimes, you just want to sit down and talk to your wife and explain to her how you really feel about certain situations within the marriage and outside the marriage, and not to be judged, to be less than, weak, a complaining husband. You just want to be able to share your feelings with your wife, to let her understand what your struggles are as a man.
And another thing I always hear you guys talk about is the fact that you don't want them to bring it up again and use it against you.
Exactly.
That's a weakness. So
exactly.
there's
Because it
learning on
takes a
both
lot.
sides.
It takes a lot. That's a lot of courage for a man to open up to his significant other, because that's coming from a place of vulnerability, a place of being weak, and you trust that this person is going to guard your feelings the way how they would guard theirs.
So what's the solution then? So you want to show up, you want to be able to respect the independent woman, the strong-willed woman, and you also want to be vulnerable, have good communication, be heard. How do you get there outside of working together to get there? I mean,
that is easier said than done, but how you get there is to work on yourself first. We both genders need to work on ourselves first. Past experiences, past traumas always pop up in current relationships. And we have to be honest with ourselves, not with each other in the beginning, but with ourselves. Am I ready for this relationship? Can I deal with that person and their attitude? Can I deal with that person and their lazy behavior? Can I deal with that person working 10-hour day shifts? Can I deal with that person who always want to have a fancy car? Can I deal with that person who have a bad shopping habit? Can I deal with that person who don't have any friends? Can I deal with that person who have a unstable relationship with their family members?
bad money habits, bad
Bad
eating
money habits,
bad
right?
health habits,
Yes.
bad work ethic.
Yes. Flaws, can I deal? So I often tell people, I told myself, can I see myself with my wife for long term with all of her flaws?
You know my motto, if I can't love you today, in the event you never change, then I am not the one for you. Because way too many of us think that we can be with someone and eventually they're going to change, or we might be able to just deal with these things. But I've always read and heard that the little things that you may like, or maybe a little bit of a nuisance when you're single, once you're married to that person, it's
Yes, it's elevated to the 10th power.
It's elevated to the 10th power, and you're like, oh no, what the heck?
Yep. And then now, and people get together for different reasons. She might be a baddie, he might make good money.
Age,
Huh?
aging,
Aging,
babies,
desperation,
family pressure,
society pressure. But I think the one key aspect of a successful relationship is working on yourself first.
So when you say first, I wanted to piggyback on that. Are you saying first before marriage or first before you get married, meaning during counseling before marriage? Or are you saying work on yourself even in the marriage?
When I say first, I mean work on yourself while you're single.
That's interesting.
Yes, even before you date.
Well, you did the work.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, huh?
And still, there are things that we still have to navigate through in relationship.
Well, yes. So here's the thing, right? There's a difference between things outside the marriage that affects the marriage or things within the marriage that's affecting the marriage.
Okay.
So outside the marriage could be, a person lose their job, a person decide to go back to school, a person got sick, right? Those are things outside the marriage that will also have an effect on the marriage. But things within the marriage that can have a negative effect could be insecurities, infidelity, lack of trust, lack of respect, lack of understanding.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So usually when there's a lack of trust, you need to work on yourself, right? Either person, because the other person who is doing stuff, which could be the infidelity part, while you married and you still want to cheat. Right?
And watching porn is a form of cheating too. Don't forget that.
That's another conversation for another day. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we all need to work on before we make another person uncomfortable in their life because of our miserable self. So when I say work on yourself, yes, you work on yourself first, and then you can say, you know what, now I'm a whole being and I'm ready to share myself with the other person.
It's funny too, because a lot of times you're right with all of that. And a lot of times when there's that conversation about the genders and how people show up, the men don't always address the fact that sometimes they're comfortable with not stepping up in their traditional roles either. They're comfortable with some of these women stepping in and doing a lot of what they do and making the decisions and taking lead. So it's like each person is kind of using certain things. To your point where you said the guys say women use men when it's to their advantage, I think men are doing the same thing.
Yeah, but that's another conversation for another time.
You're right. Right. But it's a thought.
It's a thought, right? So usually I don't watch those videos, but when my wife bring the conversation to me, I see two hurt people. I see two people trying to find their self, but pointing fingers at other people.
Yeah, it's always
that's what I see.
It's always about trying to find yourself and, like you said, working on yourself. And there's a lot of times when you don't know what you need to work on until you're in relationship. And that is the beauty of relationship, to be honest.
Like my wife says, being in a marriage is like a mirror.
Absolutely.
You get to see all your faults because your spouse is going to call you out.
100%.
Yeah. But on that note, Kay, let me go.
You calling out? All right.
Yes, I'm calling out, right? So let me go. Let me get something to eat, and we're going to talk later.
All right. Well, thanks for calling. Good conversation.
Yes. And enjoy the rest of the week.
All righty. I will. You too. Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to this week's conversation.
If you like what you heard and want to listen to what we chat about next, please look for Realistic Conversation Podcast on all streaming platforms.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and peep into our next episode by clicking the subscribe button. You'll then be notified of when we post next. See you soon.